All right, guys, so before we start, we want to talk about just as a note, the antitrust. Before we begin, we would like to make clear that the Faurecia is committed to compliance with the antitrust law in all its activities and its so, oh, perfect. Thank you, thank you. We will not engage, and just to continue over here, we will not engage, and members must refrain from any discussion or understanding regarding competitive sensitive topics. If you have any doubts regarding whether a matter is appropriate for discussion, please consult with your antitrust counsel. Any questions, concerns on that? If not, let's move to the next one. All right. So so the agenda for today is a couple of straightforward questions. Why is there the need for AOSP app framework standardization expert group? We'll go more through that. What already has happened in Faurecia. So we have had 2 meetings so far this year. We'll go over that. Nothing much in detail. We can go much in detail in there if needed. Status of the ongoing working groups and what's next, and we'll take some questions. And as we go through, if you guys have any questions, just raise your hand and we'll answer. All right. So why is there the need for AOSP app standardization group? As you can see in the past, on the left-hand side, if you're an app developer, each OEM has their own requirements, and that causes overhead and additional resource constraint on the app developer. So as we go forward, at least with Faurecia, our goal over here is to have one set of requirements for the app developer and get more folks aligned, because usually if you look at the way things are, app developers, they don't have too many resources, and for them to work with other OEMs, it's kind of stressful. So having one set of requirements from Faurecia makes life easy. All right. So going over here, as you can see, you have multiple apps. You have an aggregator such as Faurecia, Aptoid, and Harman. So makes it easy for them to provide apps for our customers. End of the day, the main thing is you want to make the customer. Oh, sorry.
There we go.
Excellent. All right. Sorry about that. The end goal is to make our customer, the people who buy these cars, we want them to be happy. We want them to be satisfied with the vehicle that they have, and we want to bring their experience that they have on their mobile phone at home into the vehicle. So this is a good way to bring that, make it happen. All right. So what are the goals? Part of the standardization group, it's to enable a rich experience for our customers, frictionless onboarding and testing and verification of the apps, building across different platforms, and then avoiding fragmentation, as I had mentioned earlier.
Probably jumping in there and just telling a little story how it all started and why we need it. We already heard from Richard now what is the difference between the traditional approach and the platform ecosystem that we want to build there. But I mean, if I'm taking you on a little time travel back a few years, when within BMW we decided, okay, we will go for an Android-based infotainment system, then someone had a really brilliant idea and was like, hey, there are Android apps out there. We have an Android infotainment system. Doesn't that mean that we just get an app store and we will have like that all of the different Android applications in our car? I mean, what could go wrong? Let me spoil you, a lot can go wrong on the way. So we tried it out. We were talking to the app developers and told them the car will be just another smartphone on wheels. There will be no difference. We were promising the customers that there will be always fresh content within the car. And we also promised the management that they will now see all of the cool use cases within the car. Yeah, then it hit us. We had the Android infotainment system. We tried it out with the apps and we realized they are not working. Partially they're not working because there are no guidelines for driver distraction compliance, which obviously is one of the main differences between mobile and between automotive. But on the other hand, if you're going for an independent Android-based system, then you do not have the Google services there. So we saw that and we had to go back to our management and tell them, hey, all of the cool use cases we promised, we cannot bring them. We can't do that. And the statement, we can't do that, usually automotive management likes as much as hearing we have a production stop. So we had to figure something out. Then we were talking to the app developers and told them, hey, we promised you that everything will be there. We know that you want to bring the features, but we're not ready yet. But we came to the conclusion, hey, we don't want to just say we can't do that. We want to change the phrase from we have an idea, we can change that, we can do that jointly. But that is not a journey that one individual OEM, one individual app developer, or one individual store provider can do. That is something that is only working if we're teaming up and making sure that we have a platform that is standardized in a way that really the app developers on one hand are enabled to bring the applications to the car and have the necessary features, but on the other hand, also having the crucial reach to really distribute their app, that it makes sense to develop the use cases, since we strongly believe that the cool use cases for automotive, we might not even know them today, but we need to make the environment happen for the app developers, that they can develop them and that the reach is being there. And that is where we started with the expert group, where we shared the idea with other OEMs, with other app store providers, other app developers, that we see that there is a real shot building an automotive app ecosystem that is no longer about customizing an app for an individual OEM. And if you're going to an app developer and kind of proposing to them, hey, do you want to do something customized for a minimum fleet size without getting anything for it, or at least not from a money perspective getting for it, then usually you're confronted with two reactions. They're laughing at you or they're leaving the call. And that is when we went to the meetings and kind of were like, okay, we now have something here with Covisa where we're jointly working on these issues on building the base. And there we saw that the need is there from different sides, and there we teamed up within an expert group in Covisa and started back then in April this year in the all members meeting, where we kind of presented for the first time the idea where we want to go to and why we see the need for it, and had quite some crucial discussions with several OEMs, several app providers over there to see, hey, what are the use cases, what are the pain points? Since, I mean, on one hand, on OEM side, we know a few of the pain points, but as Richard already stated, the real customer group for us are the app developers. So we need to get in touch with them and really figure out what is bothering them, what is on their mind, and what we need to work on. And we saw that kind of three big topics came up. The app developers want to develop something, but they need to test it. So we need to have some kind of cross-OEM emulator that they have the chance to test their services before they bring them to the car. Because testing them in front of the customer is on one hand not ideal for the customer, but it's also not good for the image of the OEMs or for the image of the app developers. So that is one of the pain points where we see that for the Play Store, a lot is already there if you want to bring an app to Google Automotive Services, but we really have a gap that we need to close as OEMs who are using a white label app store provider. And then two other big topics that came up talking about innovation is that the developers want to engage with the customers in the car, and that means that they want to send some kind of push notifications. Now, if you're using Google Services, you're all set, everything is there. If you're not using Google Services, then at this point, there is no way for an app developer to send a push notification to a customer. A concept that seems so simple and that everyone knows from the mobile phone, that is just not there for automotive, that we need to figure out to kind of enable the app developers to use that. And another request was regarding camera API, where the app developers were not even sure and addressed us and were like, okay, we know that there is something from Google, but we still do not know what is the default in-vehicle camera, how to access it, to which cameras can we expect in the future to have access to. And these questions they want to have answered before they start developing something for automotive. And that were kind of the three priority topics that were identified at the all members meeting in Portugal that we want to start with. However, that's really only the start. We know the more parties are getting involved, and this session is some kind of call for action for the participants here who have the input, be it from store provider side, from app provider side, from OEM side, to really share what you're experiencing, where we need to close the bridge, or we need to kind of bridge between white label solution and Google solution there to make sure that not every OEM is starting to work individually for it, because that overall will create fragmentation. And that, on one hand, will not work out long-term for the OEMs. I mean, we saw it for several years, what it means to maintain and integrate only one music streaming provider, for example, into the car. Now we want to look at a full range of different services, different applications that we can bring to the car. And the sooner we start, the better the chances that we, on one hand, have it sooner in the car, but also have it in the car in a scalable way. And then the outcome of Portugal was like, okay, we have the 3 top topics. We want to have the expert group, but we still needed to formalize a little bit. How will this expert group look like? Do we want to work together? And that's when we came together back then in June in Munich and kind of really kicked off the expert group.
All right. Oh, thank you, Melina, for that. So then we had the next one in Munich, and in this meeting, the main thing was, one of the main things we discussed was the election of chairs. At that time, GM was one of the new members in there, and part of that, there was multiple discussions. And going back to what Melina was saying, we created 3 main working streams: the camera API, push notification, and cross OEM emulators. We'll go more on that as we go through the next few slides over here. We also had a presentation on in-vehicle camera access. A lot of good came out of that meeting, and the more we had these additional sync-up meetings, which we have every Monday. And if you guys go into our Google Calendar, the Covesa Google Calendar, you can see it out there, and you can subscribe to that and join and see what's going on. All right. So one of the things we also discussed was the critical success, or what the goals were. Creating this group, this expert group, along with OEMs, suppliers, the goal is to come to a common protocol solution. That way we can achieve what we want to do, that is have one set of requirements, avoid fragmentation, and provide a good customer experience. All right. So what's going on in the work stream, as I was talking about earlier? One of the things that came out of this was the in-vehicle camera access. The deliverables were, so as of right now, if you look at the default camera, it's going to be a rear view camera, which you don't want for video conferencing, right? So you want to have a set of requirements to allow default cameras. You might have a forward-facing camera or whatever, cabin cameras. You want to use those for your conferencing. The other thing is also we want to allow access to these cameras to the developers. And in doing so, we would have to have some additional protocols, API, make them open. And we want to minimize the amount of references we have over here in terms of the Google standard. We want to use it as a baseline, but we also want to make it more generic so we can get more app developers to come into this place. So as you can see over here, the small timeline, we got the feedback from the different folks in the group, did a small POC, proof of concept. We're working on timelines to see other OEMs to get involved, and then to publish this information so others can see, hey, this is what we have done.
You have a question?
Yeah. Hi, yeah, so your camera access API, is it a very, just, you don't need to deep dive it, but are we talking about a low-level API or a high-level API?
It's a high-level API, so the idea here is not to replace what Google is defining, it's more to clarify. So if you look at the Google documentation, you can have a set of different cameras on the car. You can have up to 9 facing the interior of the car. From the app developer's perspective, what we want to more or less clarify is what's the default camera. So if you have a conferencing app, for instance, for the driver, should you use the center row facing the driver, the left row, the right row? We have left-hand driving cars, right-hand driving cars. So the idea here is not to replace what Google is doing, it's more to clarify the existing APIs, so that from that perspective, you know which camera should you access when you're building an app. So the types of camera and the locations are already defined by the documentation. What we're trying to do here is just to clarify and make sure that everybody's on the same page. all the OEMs agree that the default camera should be, I don't know, row center, row left, row right.
So the API isn't actually.
It's the camera API
It's-
from Android.
Yeah. So,
It's a
okay,
camera
so
API.
yeah. So it's you're not defining an API per se. It's more of a cookbook almost, or because.
So we're not redefining the API. We're just clarifying and making sure that all the OEMs agree.
Yeah.
How
This
it
would
should
be the
interpreted.
behavior.
Sorry?
This would be the behavior that if you. Trying to think of a good example off the top of my head because I don't work in this area, but I'm just trying to understand the work. You know, like you were saying about how the API would respond, which camera it would use, or
it's just the Android camera API. In terms of using the camera, it's just like a mobile app. What we want here is to make sure that we access the right camera. So if you can have up to 9 cameras facing the interior of the car. We just need to tell the developer which one is the right one to use if you're building an app.
okay, thank you.
And probably to add to that, I mean, we got the questions from the app developers that they see that something from Google is there, but what they already saw is that the OEMs are not always following the standard that Google set, and they wanted to get some kind of confidence level. And also thinking in the future, we're seeing that depending on which operation system level you are, there are different ways to access the camera. It's getting more specific. We can do a deep dive there real quick later. And these were the questions that we got from the app developers. Should we already prepare for the higher operating levels, operating system levels? Does that make sense? Will that be supported by the OEMs? And can we get the confidence level that if we roll out an application for a white label app store, that then the OEMs that are contracted with this white label app store will be really compliant there? And since we want to start with the low-hanging fruits, that is not starting with defining a completely new API, we picked that as one of the examples that will solve one of the pain points for the app developers to know what will be there, to have the confidence that this can be used, and then work from there to see if we need to specify it more, if we need to extend it, or if we're good with what is there. But that was kind of the thinking and where we were coming from. Welcome.
Okay, so I think we are here on the camera. One thing that Melina mentioned is actually also the Android version. So some of these APIs are only available on Android 13, but we don't have that many OEMs already on Android 13. So one of the objectives here is also to see from the OEM's perspective if it's feasible or not to backport this kind of interface to the previous versions of Android. So the objective here is mainly to clarify the interfaces, have the agreement between the different OEMs, are they able to support it or not, and have a reference implementation, also the feedback from the third-party apps, so that everybody's on the same page and we can make sure that these kind of use cases are working across OEMs.
Okay. Oh, thank you for that.
So, okay.
This is about the push notification. So you want to talk about this one?
Okay. So the push notifications, we have a working session after this one, a bit more technical. I'm not sure if everybody is completely familiar with the push notification. So the idea is to send from a server a notification to the car to open up or to deliver some kind of message to an app that is not currently running. So we cannot have all the apps running in background, checking if they have message from their server. So we need to have a solution for this. So usually, if you're using Google services on mobile, at least you have the Firebase Cloud Messaging. What we're trying to do here is to define an alternative solution for the Google services that works on OEMs that are not using us. So we started with the analysis of potential alternatives, and it was interesting because there were different parties doing this assessment independently, and everybody reached the same conclusion, that unified push seemed to be the most promising solution to move forward. And we'll have a bit more detail on the next session. So there was first a POC done by BMW, and I think my VIO also was trying it out. But the big advantage of this unified push is that it's only standardizing the APIs between the server part and the client, but then each OEM can decide to provide their own solution. So each OEM can decide either to use their own solution, to pick one from Covez if we have, from the App Store providers, a commercial one. So the idea here is only to standardize interfaces, not the solution itself. Of course, we want to have a reference implementation, some test cases to prove that it works, but that's the objective. So past the POC, we're trying now to gather feedback from the, let's say, the most obvious use case from this kind of apps, which are the communication apps. So for instance, if you're receiving a call on Zoom or WebEx, but you don't have the app running already, how do we bring up that app to receive the incoming call? That's where we are at this moment. Yeah, and I think that's mostly it. I mean, there's some open topics as well. How will this be hosted in the future? I think that's mostly an OEM decision, but it's good that we discuss this in scope of Covesa.
And I have a video demo from Max, just to show how this actually works with, and hopefully this works here. And we have Max online, so if there's questions he can answer based on the POC that was done.
So basically, Maxi is being the push notification expert from BMW side who just did a feasibility check on our system as kind of a first step to see if it's working with unified push.
As you can see, the application's been installed on the radio head unit, but it's an emulator, and just sending a test notification from the back office to the vehicle. And as you can see over there, the notification shows up in the vehicle. And I
Okay.
believe that's it for the video. All right.
Thank you. Thanks. This question is for both push notification and the front camera for video conferencing. Is this a gap or a hole that you see in gas? If OEMs use gas and you're trying to fill that gap in the AOSP world, or do they exist in the gas as well?
So there's different answers depending on the topic. So for the camera, there's no gap. So gas is defining the interface. The OEMs can use the interface. As I mentioned previously, the idea is to clarify how do we interpret the existing interface and whether or not it's possible to backport the Android 13 interface to the previous generations. But the interface is there. There's no gap. On the push notifications, the solution is different between a gas and non-gas. So I'm not sure we are in gas today. At least until some time ago, there were no push notifications yet on Android Automotive, but they will come for sure. What we're trying to do here is to be proactive and provide already a solution for non-gas systems even before they reach gas. But for the push notifications, the solution is slightly different. However, what we're proposing here, it's compatible with the web push. So most of the apps already support browser push notifications. So if they support this, it's easy to use the solution that we are proposing, which is unified push.
Yeah, just to confirm, yes, Mavi.io was able to test both for parking and for food. We were able to use unified push, send out notification. The end-to-end demo is what we are collectively working on. So yes, we were able to get this to work. So.
Thank you for that.
I think there's one more question.
No.
Is unified you're mentioning browser capabilities. Is unified push based off of W3C's notifications API by chance?
I think I'm not sure. It's compatible with web push. It's not exactly the same, and we're talking about a bit on the working session afterwards.
Okay.
But it's mostly compatible with web push. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah, so the next session that we have, as was mentioned over here by Jose, is that We'll talk more in detail on that one, and then we can have more roundtable discussion on that. So this is just a high level as to what we have done so far in these expert group meetings to provide high level. So that's what we have. And I see another question.
Yeah, so is driver distraction handled by this push notifications? Because if the app keep pushing notifications, wouldn't it be distracting the driver?
So I think we need to distinguish, the push notification is not a notification. A push notification is a way to send a message to the car. What the app does with the data that it receives, it's up to the app. And there are guidelines to handle notifications on the car. So these are two different things. The fact that we saw here on the demo notification, on the notification center, it's an app decision, but there are guidelines to handle the notification, the in-car notifications. So the push notification is just sending a message from the server to an app that is not running on the IVI.
Okay.
It's just delivering the message. Then what is done with the message, it's a different thing. And the app can show a notification or can do something else, can open the app, can trigger some service in the background. It's up to the app logic to decide what to do with that message that is received.
Okay, thank you.
Another question down here.
Related to that, is there
Sure.
then some thought into,
Oh, there's a mic right next to you.
is there some thinking around putting in some of that driver distraction logic around the notification?
So it's not our objective to redefine what Google is defining. So Google defines already the guidelines to handle head-up display notifications on the car. We don't want to replace that.
But that's not for AOSP, AOSP, right? So
It is. I mean, it's not bound to the Google services. The way that you handle notification on a non-gas system, it's the same for a gas system. So we're just trying to bridge the gaps between non-gas and gas. The things that are already defined on gas, we don't want to change them. That's not the
you'll
objective.
follow the same.
Yes,
Got
that's the objective, yeah.
And also just to add to that, the same comment, right? So the goal of, especially with push notification, is that we want to bring this feature into the vehicle, bridge the gap, because right now there is a gap in there. So the goal is to get this in there, and then later on, if we find, like, based on our proof of concept, that we need to add some additional peripherals for driver distraction, then we can look into that. But as of right now, our goal is to bring this in the vehicle, close the gap, and then get a better experience in the vehicle. So that's the goal. Good.
Can I quickly ask? Yes.
Yeah.
So from an SoC vendor perspective, when we are trying to cater to a gas OEM, we do have a series of test suites from Google, like CTS, VTS, to ensure that the product, the software product that we provide to OEM is compliant with Google and hence gas compliant. Is there a similar test suite in the AOSP world that an SoC vendor has to be aware of and support it so that it is
I think
it can support these apps?
Yeah, so the CTS doesn't need to be necessarily bound to gas. It's an Android certification. So the OEMs going non-gas can also go through this certification. What we see, at least from our experience at Faurecia, is that we have more heterogeneous systems. So we have some OEMs that are more compliant with CTS, some OEMs that are less compliant, and we try to support all of them. So I guess when you are on the gas world, the systems are a bit more homogeneous, more standardized, but nothing prevents the OEMs going non-gas to also run through the CTS and be an Android certified device, even without the gas. So I think there's two parts of it. One is the Android certification, so the CTS and the VTS. The other thing is the gas certification, which it's outside of the scope, of course, for non-gas systems.
And what we
Oh, it's off.
Oh, good. There we go. And what we definitely have in mind is if we're developing a solution within Covisa, especially for the example for push notifications, if we're saying, okay, we agreed on a mechanism, but every OEM is implementing it on their own because there might be some hesitance to take something directly from Covisa and bring it into the car, then we would opt for doing some kind of compatibility testing there and having a testing suite. So that always seems to be the two approaches. Either you develop it within Covisa and then you know which OEMs are using it, or the OEMs are doing it on their own, and we ensure that we're being compatible there and having some kind of Covisa certified compatibility, that's how I would call it, to once again have this confidence level for the app developers that we're being compliant there. And probably talking about push notifications, just using that as an example of the working mode of the expert group, there is something where back then in April we identified, okay, we have an issue with push notification. That's not an issue that an individual OEM is seeing, but it's an issue that several OEMs, several app stores, and several application providers are seeing. And from April to now in October, we came to the point where we really could do the POC, where with BMW, we're just the first OEM who did the POC, but doing this kind of POC to just see if that solution, that open source solution from Unified Push is working, that's like a 1 hour effort on OEM side. So we can do and can use that as a step-by-step approach to gather kind of knowledge sharing, which ideas do we see is something out there that we can reuse, because we don't want fragmentation. If something is there, we're more than willing to use it. Then seeing if it's working for the OEMs, then looping in app providers like we did with Mavi.io to make sure is what the OEMs are thinking about really what the apps need, to make sure that we don't deviate there, and then do the step-by-step. And that is what we're envisioning for the several work streams where we might see, okay, we just had the base layer and the starting point, which is good, but we see in the future that we need to extend the scope because the need is there. And that's how we want to interact within the working group. But that is also why it's so important for us to have as many OEMs and as many application providers in there, because depending on the region, for example, the necessities or what is being needed for development might differ, and that is something that we want to know as early as possible in the process to jointly define where we need to move as an industry.
I think you had a question. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. So I would like to just maybe confirm if I understood this correctly. So you identify the gap with the notification, and this work that you do currently is more like identifying the technology stack that fill the gap. And you are proving that with the proof of concept in Mavi.io, so I like it because it's working, you can see it, you can show the video. I have a question regarding this unified push. I don't have like the background. How many of the solutions did you try? Is there only this one or many others? How you select this one? What is the community behind to, if you look to the future, how to secure that this solution will be stable, reliable in the long run? Did you check this or did you do this research? Thank you.
Just to add to that same comment, right? So on the previous slide that I had here, and I have it here too. So we looked at different options. We did kind of a matrix to see, what each provides the gain. What helps us out as a community. So we've actually had this conversation in our group, in our weekly meeting, and out of this, unified push is what came out. So at General Motors, we do have something called use services, which we are contributing to Covesa, and that's something else we are trying to bring in. So, like I had mentioned earlier, we have a problem. We need to close a gap, and looking at what's available right now in the market, which is kind of open source and someone can use it, is the unified push. So that's where we are. But in adding additional solutions, I don't think that's a problem. I think what we were looking at is what's right now in the market and what can we use. And that's why we're here.
So we can, in the future, we can replace this open source library with some other, and with you just defining the way how this should be implemented. Is it correct thinking?
I can add here. So if you go to the Covesa page, there's a presentation that was done on one of the weekly meetings where we have a trade-off. We analyze the different options, pros and cons of each one. So the advantage here of unified push, it's not a solution. It's just a protocol and an API. Then we have some open source implementations, but anybody can use whatever they want. So the OEMs or the store providers. So the idea is that we standardize the APIs. The apps know which API do I need to use on the client side and on the backend, but then the actual implementation, it's free. So this also added some weight on the solution because it gave us more flexibility. Also, the kind of license that we have in some of the existing open source solutions are compatible with AOSP, so it's Apache 2.0. But it's really the flexibility, the fact that it's similar to web push. So the apps that already support web push will have a minor, let's say, friction for adopting this unified push solution. So that was the main rationale. But you can check the details, and feel free to provide feedback if you see other alternatives.
Yeah, thank you very much. Actually, my main concern was like, when you have open source project, at some point, this could somehow the work will not be developed further. And so in this case, OEM can also have own implementation of this push notification. Okay, thank you very much.
So we focus on the API. The fact that we have an open source implementation just helps doing the proof of concept, but we don't know what will be the commercial solution available in production.
Okay, thank you very much.
As long as we make sure that the interface towards the app developers is being the same, we're good there. And then we also remain a little bit of flexibility, which usually the OEMs like to have, while still making the life easier for the apps.
Forgive me if this is a bad question, but on the server side for push notification, so I see in the interim steps it says options for each OEM doing their own solution, it looks like, versus having a Covisa standard solution. So if I was a third-party app developer, how do you handle each OEM has its own push
We'll
server?
check it on the next session.
Oh, okay.
Yes, that's why I had mentioned the next session is
It's
more
detailed
in
on
detail.
push
This one.
notification.
So,
But it's standardized.
yeah. So let's hold on questions on the push notification because we have a whole session on that. So we'll come back to that more. All right. Oh, yeah. So an important thing is if you're an app developer, you want to test the app that you're making, right? So to get something that works across different OEMs, we've been working, in our group, we have had Snap and Harman. So Snap, as of recently, has released an emulator in their GitHub. So if you guys want to check it out, see how that works, please do so. And Harman has also mentioned that they will help in customizing the emulator for your specific needs. So they have also stepped up to this. This is where we stand with emulators. And the good thing is, especially the way things are today, every OEM has their own emulator, or you can use Google's. But the thing is, the apps don't work properly. So the goal is to have one emulator for all OEMs that we can test the apps. And then later on, you can add your own flavor to it. So that's where we are going with the emulator at this point. Go ahead.
How do you, so if you have one standardized emulator, how you differentiate with the different screen dimensions, sizes, and because that's one of the biggest issue that we have when we are working with the content partners to bring the applications.
Yeah, I mean, you can actually, with, let's say, a common emulator, just use different hardware profiles. For instance, in our Faurecia Aptoide documentation, we provide hardware profiles for the different OEMs that we work with. Of course, we know that developers most of the time don't read the full documentation, so it's always a challenge to provide this to the developers. But yeah, you can pick one emulator and import different hardware profiles and test different screen sizes and resolutions, which will be more representative of the OEM. So we try to abstract here what is generic and what would be specific. So you can have a generic emulator and then have an hardware profile which is OEM specific to check specific use cases, or, I mean. Another topic on the emulator which is that we're seeing is for some categories of apps, namely the points of interest templated apps, we don't have yet a good solution for non-GAS apps. So the GAS emulator renders the maps, the Google Maps, but the open source emulator doesn't have any map. So there's an AOSP emulator. We need to bridge the gap here to support at least the POI, the parking, the location-based services apps that require a map to be rendered. This is one of the things also on this working stream.
And I mean, if you're talking about the emulator, we have like two challenges. One is the good news that we have to win that from Snap there is the generic emulator even for Android 14 there that now can be used by the app providers. But the OEMs need to make sure that they're compatible to the emulator. If we had it earlier with the CTS test, that not every OEM is yet there, that we are 100% compliant. So that is the internal challenge that probably all of the OEMs are tackling, that if we give the generic emulator, that our system is behaving as close as possible to the reference emulator that we have there. And then the second one will be in which way do we need to extend the emulator, like for example talking about how can we have different display formats and so on in there, which is where Haman jumped in, where they with their emulator already did a lot of work that you can kind of simulate different brands within one emulator to easen it up. And there at the moment we're working on finding the synergies to see would that really be two different emulators, can we combine that to one emulator, and what are the gaps that we still, or what are the extensions that we still need to make to the emulator. Might be that we develop something new within Covisa that we then want to enable the app developers to test within the emulator. So that is not a project where we can say, okay, we have a cut at some point and then we're good, but that will be ongoing. And once again, there we need the input from the different stakeholders to see which extensions do we need.
Just to add a comment, I think one of the ideas is also to the other work streams can also feed the emulator. So if we have a solution for the push notifications, we want the emulator also to support it. The same for the camera API. So anything that deviates from the AOSP that we're adding on Covisa, we also want to bring it to the emulators.
And maybe to add one additional thing, what we at Remotive Labs already are doing with Volvo Cars. Some of you saw the presentation in Porto already, that we can feed it with real vehicle recordings as well, so that it makes life easier for the app developers to actually get real data into their emulator. So the app would think it sits in a real vehicle.
Yeah, it makes sense, definitely.
Thank you. All right. So from here, where do we go? What's next? All right. So one of the things that we wanted to do, with the amount of time we have, I don't think we can do a whole on this, but we can take it offline, is having a brainstorming session to see what do you guys want to see coming out next. As we mentioned, there's been 3 topics that we're looking into in the group. With the amount of time we have right now, I don't think we can do that, but any one of us can talk to you guys offline and have that conversation. And you can also join our weekly meeting where we do talk about open topics, so that can be brought in that meeting too. The other item is the CES that's happening January 9th. It's kind of a joint different OEMs and suppliers together, and we also plan to have some vehicle demos to show what we have been worked on so far. That's what I have right now. Camille,
You're talking about CS, I mean, next to the technical standardization on really building the platform for the app developers, the other thing is what we already talked about, how can we get the confidence level for the app developers. And if we leverage the CS, and that might be a vehicle demonstration, but that might be just a joint podium discussion where the OEMs are coming together in regards of Covisa and inviting the app developers there to really having the open exchange that everyone is having one-on-one, and I'm pretty sure the app developers are telling every OEM the same story there. But really using that to have an exchange and to have a clearer picture in the end in which direction we need to move, that would be something that we're having on our mind, where we would be more than happy making that happen at CES. And if we're talking about what's next, one of the questions we have within the expert group that we want to answer is also, can this initiative benefit the guest OEMs, the OEMs who are using Google Automotive Services? Because, I mean, we do not want to have the fragmentation. That's why we, as of now, focus on closing the bridge. However, if there is also from guest OEMs the feedback, hey, there is something that needs some kind of level of standardization, or we see features that we would like to have in the cars, also from developer perspective, which is not yet there for guests, then that would be also valuable feedback to get to kind of review the scope of the group in which direction we should move. And I mean, if we're talking about CES, happy that you just give any one of us a ping, and then we see what makes sense to set up there within the Covisa event that is taking place, which is already fully organized by Covisa, which is nice. So we could just jump in there and say we organize something jointly.
Thank you. Oh, yes, do you want to add a few comments before we end? All right. So that's all we have here. I know we don't have much time left, but we can take questions offline from anyone here because we have a next session starting here. Thank you for your time, guys, and take care.